Welcome to the Whitetail Watch produced by Hoyt's Bow Hunting Whitetails. This is the morning of Wednesday, December 4th. It's pretty nice out right now compared to what it's been the past few days. But before today is over, we're supposed to see wind chills below zero. So it's going to be windy and getting colder here for the next couple of days. That's one of the things that we're going to talk about on today's episode, how the weather now is going to affect what the deer do. But the other thing affecting behavior is the second rut. And the question is, how much of a role does the second rut play in the behavior of these deer? So once we hear from our sponsors, we'll come back and talk about both of these aspects of behavior and how they affect the way we hunt during the coming weeks. Hoyt's Bow Hunting Whitetails is brought to you by Redneck Blinds, Code of Silence Apparel, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail App, Whitetail Institute, Research Equals Results, B3 Releases, XO Broadheads, Exact Sights, Muddy Outdoors Tree Stands, Stealth Cam Trail Cameras, and Hoyt. Let's talk about the most obvious one first, and that's the weather. It's going to be cold here for the next couple of days, and then by the weekend it's supposed to warm back up again. Really, the late season, it's more about the deer going from bed to food, and the urgency with which they do that and the amount of that type of movement that we see in daylight a lot of times is just determined by the weather. If it gets really cold, the deer feel this almost like a shock to their system, and they have a real strong need to feed. So the weather is going to play a big role. Like I said, when it's warmer, you're just not going to see as much activity during the day as the deer head to food. They're still going to feed, because they've been through the rut. It's been a rough period for them. Both the bucks and the does, they've had to pay a pretty heavy price, for this breeding season. So they're going to be back on the food, but you may not see a lot of it during daylight because of the weather patterns or, maybe other factors, hunting pressure. Those are the two big ones. But on my trail cameras, I'm seeing it already. Tons and tons more photos on the cameras that are near food sources than what there was during the rut. I mean, I got very little around, my cameras on the food plots during the rut itself. But now it's nothing to get, dozens upon dozens, and the deer coming out, well before dark. So that's going to be one pattern that we can look to. But the other one is a little bit tougher to predict, and it's maybe in some ways almost controversial in whether or not people even believe it exists. It's kind of silly to me to think that it doesn't exist because the biologists and the experts have been talking about it ever since I was a boy. And that's the second rut. There's a certain number of does that aren't bred during the first cycle. Whether it's because they just didn't come in to estrus or there weren't enough bucks available during the period when they were in estrus for the breeding to take place. Regardless of that, they do come back in again 28 days later, which puts them roughly in this time frame. So if the primary rut peaks in November 15th throughout much of the whitetails range, now we're looking at sometime around the 13th or the 12th of December when it peaks again, for this secondary rut, which, the secondary rut is really very small as a percentage compared to the primary. So you're not going to see just massive amounts of bucks moving during the day, morning cruising near bedding areas, all that stuff that we really focused on a month ago. We're not going to see that now, but there is breeding that takes place. And on top of that, the experts have noted that in a good range, an area where there's a lot of food and the deer are super healthy, up to 40% of the doe fawns will breed the first year also. So you're looking at a pretty significant number of does and doe fawns coming into estrus over the next couple of months. It's not all early December. Some of it's also going to be early January, especially with the fawns. Some of them are going to cycle as much as 2 months later, and I've heard people say that it's 3 to even sometimes 4 months later, and I don't know that I've observed that ever myself. But again, if you rely on some of the studies and what the biologists have come up with, the extended rut that takes place with the fawns, and again, that's going to drop off little by little. So let's almost forget about that period. Maybe January's got another one, but let's really focus on this early December secondary rut. So how do you hunt that? Fortunately for us, it really doesn't. Both of those movement patterns have the same strategy related to them, and that's just spend your time near preferred food sources and let the deer find you. If you've really got a hardy constitution, you could go out and sit in the mornings, I suppose, near the bedding areas and try to catch the bucks looking for those does. I don't know if that works or not, because I'm just not that guy. I'm just not tough enough after all that we've hunted during the rut to go out there now in December when the wind chills are super frigid and sit in those same tree stands I sat in back in November. So I don't know if that will work or not. But I do know that getting into a blind in the evenings near a food source, maybe cracking the LP heater on, and just sitting back and seeing what comes out is a lot more enjoyable after, I said, a long period of hunting, deep in the timber during the rut. And it does work. There are factors, like I said, that come into play. The amount of hunting pressure these deer have seen, it may prolong the time frame before they start moving in daylight. I've seen that before, where it might take a couple of weeks after the firearm seasons are over before you'll start to see that behavior where the deer are moving back to food again during the day. But to hunt the secondary rut and to hunt the food sources, those are the same thing. So the does are going to food and the bucks are going to be going to food too. Not only are they going to be there to see if there is that odd second cycle doe or first cycle estrus doe fawn, but they're also going to eat. They've gone through a lot with the rut, a lot of stress. They've got to restore some of that body weight that they lost. So all the action now is near the food sources. And we'll be talking about that, I guess, for every episode that we do after this. So I'm not going to do a bunch more of the Whitetail Watch episodes after this one because it's become so repetitive. I'll probably do one more, and then they're all going to be the same after that. Hunt the food, focus on where the deer are going in the evenings and how you hunt those areas. We can talk about that maybe next week, because the biggest challenge of hunting anytime you're around a food source is the access, especially how to get out at the end of legal shooting time. That's a huge challenge. So maybe we'll tackle that one next week on the Whitetail Watch. Well, I appreciate you joining me. I'll see you right back here again in another week for the next episode of the Whitetail Watch, produced by Hoyt's Bow Hunting Whitetails. And remember to always dream big.